since then, I've kind of been like, okay, so I guess all Palestinians receive olive oil from Palestine, and it's something that's totally normal, right? It's totally you get a teneke, I get a teneke. It's totally normal, but we don't actually sit there and think about this olive oil is coming from a land that most Palestinians can't access.
Sure.
This olive oil comes from trees that some of them are thousands of years old. This olive oil, like, think of the journey that single olive went through the tree, how it grew. Like, just think of it. It's so beautiful and poetic, right?
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Hope It Helps. And my guest on the show today is Miss Isra Abu Zayed. Isra, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's so exciting to be here.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. So guys, just some context. So I've known Isra for a long time, and a couple of years ago, actually, I went on their podcast, which is the Hamburger Generation. And her co-host Jamil, big shout out to Jamil, because he's the one, when I first started my podcast, he came over and he walked me through the whole process. And that's back in just in the audio days. So Jamil, much love always. Thank you so much. I wouldn't be here without that. And I had a great time coming on their show, and we're going to dive into it a little bit.
Sure.
But the topic for today, Isra, is all about olive oil, and more specifically, olive oil and Palestine. The history behind it, why it's something that's so important to us as a Palestinian, and you're a Palestinian too. So I'd want to dive into kind of how you began this initiative and talk about a couple of other things. But before we get into everything, why don't you give all of us a little bit of background about yourself, and we'll take it from there.
Oh my gosh, this is always a hard question, right?
I know,
It's like the interview question, like, tell us about yourself. Well, my name is Isra Abu Zayed. I'm Palestinian. I grew up in Canada. And I moved here to the UAE when I was 16. I've kind of lived here ever since, gotten married, had my kids here. Throughout that time, I've also I've had a career in interior design. I've had a career lecturing at the university and doing research. I've done advertising. Like a jack of all trades, but a master of none kind
Amen.
of thing.
Preach to that.
And yes, we do the podcasting, and I've also recently started doing stand-up comedy.
I know,
Just like as a way of like, let me challenge myself a little bit more. And yeah, I guess olive oil is kind of something that's existed throughout, as a Palestinian. It's something that's like always, it's that constant that you have in your life.
100%. Zeit Bladi from day one.
Yeah.
So I wanted to first start off on the podcast, because the reason, so they're called podcast guys, and you can give us more, explain to everyone what it is. But from my perspective, what I like about it is it's not like mine. It's very different. It's a story. You bring on guests and they tell a story, and usually it's a very funny story typically. Now, what I've realized over the last couple of conversations I've been having and through stuff I'm seeing online is storytelling nowadays is becoming so much more important than I think it's ever been before.
100%.
And so I want to first start off with your experience with Hamburger Generation, and what have you learned about storytelling in that time?
Okay, well, I guess with Hamburger Generation, starting off from the beginning, like, I feel like storytelling is such an important part of Arab culture, right? There's that sitting around your grandfather or your grandma and they're telling you story, or just that original Bedouin kind of culture, right? So storytelling is something that's always been huge in our family. And obviously with friends, and especially with like the most recent development of like voice notes. Right?
Yeah, true.
Something happens. What's the first thing you do? You pick up the phone, you open your friend's group chat, and then you say, guys, you won't believe, next voice note, like that energy, right? Yeah. And around 2016, I, became introduced to podcasts and listening to them through Jamil and my brother Mo.
Shout out Mo, big shout out.
Yeah, Mo. Shout out. Anyways, so and they kept just like suggesting all these different shows and like The Moth and This American Life, and I was like consuming like crazy. I'm at the gym, I'm doing all of that. Eventually, I reached a point where I was just like full of Western content. Like I was like, okay, cool. But where's us? Where's the story about like the girl in Sudan who walks to school? Or where's the story about a person in Lebanon and their struggle with their business? Like, I want to hear us. And at that time, everything that was regional was very political or very religious. That was on the podcast app. And then it just became a conversation where, you know what? We love to tell each other stories. We have interesting experiences. Our friends group have great stories. Why don't we start a storytelling podcast? And since then, it's kind of been like a journey into like discovering how stories can change everything. And honestly, I see it on Instagram. I see it on social media now, you know, with advertising, marketing, all that stuff.
Sure.
It's at the base of anything. It's all a story, you know? Recently, like 2 years ago, Jamil and I got to go to Saudi Arabia through the podcast.
I saw that. Yeah.
To do a storytelling workshop in Saudi Arabia. And even that on its own was something that, for me, as a person telling people how to tell stories, it blew my mind. Them being able to take storytelling as a tool and then sharing their stories at the end of the workshop, it allows you to connect with people on such a deep level, because unlike, for example, stand-up comedy, where you stand up and you try to make people laugh, when you're telling somebody a story, you are trying to get them to feel what you're feeling and experience what you experienced. So you're becoming more vulnerable in front of that person. You're opening up to that person. And it's really the basis of like connecting with humanity and connecting with each other. And I think nowadays we need it more than ever, you know, even with things happening around the world. For people to get the message across, they have to use storytelling, and they have to use it as a tool to get their stories, their messages across. And Hamburger Generation has just been, it's been like a beautiful experience. I mean, my husband maybe doesn't love it as much as I love it. It's always like, what is this never-ending hangout with Jamil that you have? But it's honestly also a great excuse to meet amazing, interesting people, like when you came on the podcast and people sharing their experiences. And you know what? With no phones, no interruptions. You just sit and you connect with a human being, you listen to them, and it's just so raw and beautiful, right?
Absolutely.
So that is really just the podcast summed up, really.
Yeah. So what I really like about the podcast is, it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, when you started out, it wasn't intended to be a comedy podcast.
Nope.
But it's funny how it turned out that way.
Yeah.
Because all the stories even if a story was like a heartbreaking one or intense or whatever, there was always a comedic element to it. But I think that just comes from you and Jamil as the hosts. You know, I think you guys bring that in because that's just how you kind of see things.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the host, I'm sure you know as well. Like, you're bringing your energy into the story, right? And whether it's a sad story or a happy story, whatever it is, there's always like an angle that you could look at where there's like a positive twist to it and something you can kind of like poke fun at or make fun of. So yeah, I guess that's just like our energy coming into each story. Right?
No, for sure.
Yeah.
And I like what you said about, or something that maybe is not talked about enough, the cultural aspect of stories in our culture. Just like you said, growing up, I'm sure, just like you did, like I did, sitting with my grandfather, my grandma, let me tell you, Jiddo, once upon a time, this happened, and my friend, their memory, by the way, is ridiculous. I can't remember what happened 2 days ago, but this guy can remember, 1956, on January the 2nd, at like 3 p.m., me and Aboud like met up, we had shy, and I'm like, what the fuck? How do you remember
أبو عبد الله اللي كان جار خالد اللي كانوا يطلعوا يشتغلوا بالمصنع, and he'll make like 20 connections, right?
I feel that it's funny, it's on the connection part, now that since you brought it up, I have this debate with my parents all the time. Like, my parents, Arab society is the society I believe that they grew up in. The world that we grew up in, I feel like our generation is has the last remnants of that aspect. Because if I look now to my younger brothers, my sister, in their generation, me as a person, I don't care about it as much as my parents did. So I can't imagine what's going to happen as time goes on. I don't think in 20 years when your kids are grown up, whatever, we're not going to be like, oh, how the bit me and Abu, whatever, do you agree with that? Disagree? What are your thoughts?
I mean, definitely with like urbanization, you lose that touch of the community, right? With like knowing your neighbor and like going to mahal al-hummus and that energy, right? So yeah, that is getting lost, but there's always the effort to be tied to a culture. And I definitely believe that the key to any culture is the language. So there's the language, and then there's that, and which is a struggle. I mean, look at us. We're two Palestinians talking in English right now, right? And it's a struggle that I see with my children, that I consciously have to constantly be like, احكي بالعربي, احكي بالعربي, you know?
Yeah.
And that's also, I don't know if you're aware, but we also made like a small podcast, like a 10-episode podcast, which was Mama بالعربي.
Oh, no. Okay, tell us about this. No, I didn't know that.
Okay, so it was a small podcast that we did for Al-An Radio. We pitched the idea, and my co-host was another Isra. Okay.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Okay.
She's an Arabic teacher.
Okay.
And Jamil obviously helped like produce the whole thing. And the concept was how us mothers nowadays in our modern life, how we can pass the love of the Arabic language to our children.
Yeah.
And Arabic for me is always something that I've struggled with, but I'm very aware that the Arabic language is the key to the culture. And if I want my children to understand Palestinian culture and be strong Palestinians, they need to be able to speak the language. So that podcast kind of unpacks that concept and how to make Arabic fun and that kind of thing, which is honestly a challenge.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Because like they're being attacked from all directions in social media and music, and just like Western culture is always so appealing, you know?
Very true.
But yeah, I guess as parents, that's a struggle that we constantly have to be
like
on.
enforce. Yeah, I see that so my cousins have kids and stuff, and I see the conscious effort they're putting into specifically on Arabic, and like you said, I think you're right. That is the key to tie you to the culture, to the language, to make you feel like it's a part of you. A little bit of a side tangent. So I've spoken Arabic my whole life, obviously. I understand very well and I can speak. However, my vocabulary isn't as strong as I wanted it to be. So I'm currently taking Arabic classes.
Nice.
But like I'm learning like Fusha Arabic, so it's very hectic. And I'm practicing speaking in Fusha. Of course, that's not how I would speak in a conversation with a person, but just training that muscle, because I feel like, although I did government Arabic here and graduated from that and whatever, still, because like you said, I was grew up with so much Western culture around me, not that I didn't have Arabic culture around me, I struggled to build that muscle. And I was having this conversation with my Arabic teacher. I'm like, I don't understand why. Like, how could I have gone down that route and still ended up this way? And she was like, because, for example, we grew up like here, or you grew up in Canada and then you came here. So it's obviously, even for you, it's even harder. She's like, you growing up in Dubai, because she used to teach here, most people speak English. At school with your friends, whatever. Like, even now today, I don't have any friends that I'll call and speak Arabic to. So you've never, besides being at home, you never trained that muscle. But if I grew up in Saudi or Amman or Kuwait, maybe more in quotations Arabic focused cultures, I would have developed it better.
100%. And the being aware of, I obviously, as a parent, I sit there and I reflect on this a lot.
Yeah, for you, it must be even harder, yeah.
So we said language is the key to culture, right? And to have a strong culture is to have a strong identity. So for my child to know who he or she is like the strength of like when I'm at university and let's say people are experimenting with drugs, for me to know like I am Palestinian, I am Muslim, this is what I believe, I won't do this, for example, right? To have a strong identity gives you a strong confidence. If your identity is shaken, if you don't speak Arabic and you barely know anything about where you're from, or you're just kind of a little unsure or not as confident about your identity, then that base is a little shaken,
Sure.
Yeah.
What's interesting? So you grew up in Canada for a majority of the early years of your life. So a lot of my cousins grew up in the States. What's interesting though that I've found is you'd think, and I'm speaking just on my personal experience.
Go for it.
You'd think that looking at the story, okay, they grew up in the States in a Western culture. Khalid grew up in an Arabic culture. So technically, Khalid should have a much stronger Arabic identity. But what's interesting, and I can honestly say that, they definitely have a stronger identity than I do, 100%.
Yeah.
As I'm getting older, I'm starting to try to connect more with that. So my grandfather, Allah yarhamu, was an author. So he wrote about Palestine, and his books were about his life in Palestine and how he moved to Kuwait and, you know, the people he knew. So this past year, I sat down and actually read them.
Nice.
And after reading them, I can honestly say it changed something in me. And I kind of felt bad because I'm like, fuck, I should have asked him about this while he was here.
Yeah.
I should have read this while he was here.
Yeah.
Things happen, it's okay. But it's interesting that you can grow up in your culture, and someone can grow up outside their culture and they can still have a strong cultural identity.
I mean, for us growing up in Canada, my parents had a fear of us losing our culture. So there was a lot more of like conscious decisions being taken on a daily basis of how we can retain our culture versus when we like growing up here, because I see a lot of moms that are my age who grew up in the Middle East who are very like nonchalant about culture. Like عادي, it's a given, like خلاص يحكوا عربي يحكوا إنجليزي مش مشكلة, whatever they want to talk they can talk. Whereas me, I'm coming from like a background of like, no, this is something special. This is something precious. You have to build it and you have to grow it. And if you don't, it'll disappear, because that's how it was in Canada, right?
Sure.
So yeah, I guess it's just when your environment, like when you feel at risk, you kind of hold on a little bit tighter, right? And my parents did that for us. And that's why I feel like I have a really strong Palestinian identity and I want to pass that on to my kids. And yeah, hopefully their kids to their kids.
But the point you made, I think, is I've never thought of that before, the fear.
Yeah.
That motivation to not lose it was probably such a strong driving force for your parents, which is why it makes me understand why my cousins have that stronger identity than I probably do.
Because it's a discussion that's being had. Like we recently had a person come on the podcast. Her name's Mace, and she's amazing. Like as a Palestinian, she runs this organization called the Diaspora Heartbeat here in Dubai. And she told me she grew up here, in the Middle East, and when she moved to Canada, and when her dad was leaving her, she was going to university, and he's leaving her. The strongest thing that he could tell her before he walked out of the door is, remember, you're Palestinian. Like, you're in Canada, you're in Toronto, you're studying university, all of that. But at the very core of it, in all of this, remember that you are Palestinian, and how that little statement like shook her and really kind of guided her through her experience there.
Yeah.
So it's, I mean, when you are in a different environment, you constantly have to remind yourself of who you are.
That's very, very true. And I never really considered it from that perspective. It makes me understand myself a little bit more too, on why I think the way I do and act the way I do, given listening to that story. Transitioning on to olive oil, because that's what we want to talk about today. To prepare for this podcast, so I know olive oil is important in Palestinian culture. I get it. I've always known that. But when I had to go do research, I learned things that I didn't know, like historically, why it's so important. There's so many things that I didn't know. So first of all, I want to start. Through my research, I found out that Palestinian olive oil production in Palestine started 6,000 years ago. It was one of the earliest places that olive oil was being produced, due to the climate, due to so many things.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of coffee, because I'm a big coffee drinker, and I had someone on the podcast the other day we were deep diving on coffee, and coffee only grows in certain parts of the world, just like olive trees and so on. But they're meant. It made me think, I'm like, it's meant to be there, you know? There's a reason it only grows there. There's a reason olive, for example, is only, it started growing there. So that means it's special. But I wanted to ask you, growing up, what are the stories you would hear about, like, Palestinian, like, olive oil and that significance? And what would you hear, at home?
Okay, well, obviously growing up, there's as a Palestinian child, there's this undertone that exists in the home forever that is Palestine, right? The story of Palestine.
Yeah.
So, for example, if your dad is talking to a friend on the phone about property, when he shuts the phone, he's going to be like, ugh, to buy property back home. Like, there's always that, right?
Yeah.
So, the story of Palestine is something that has existed in the back end forever. But I remember the first time where I really felt strongly towards olive oil was when we moved back from Canada to the UAE.
Okay.
And like growing up in Canada, fine, we had olive oil around the house. Or if we went to Jordan, for example, in the summer, there'd be olive oil around the house.
Of course.
But I never experienced the olive oil arriving. It is now the olive oil harvest season, and the olive oil has just arrived to our home like that. And I remember, like, for example, my mom brought the olive oil into the kitchen, and I'm like, oh, it's this like big tenaket.
Yeah.
And she's like, oh yeah, so olive oil, it just arrived from Palestine. And to her, it was so like a taken for granted statement. But for me, I was like, what do you mean? She's like, oh, it just came, الموسم, and it just came, the olive oil. And I was like, this came from Palestine? Like, really? It came from Palestine? She's like, yeah. I'm like, from the trees of Palestine? Like it almost shook me as to how special it is and how nonchalant she was being about it, you know? And I was like, wow. And she's like, yeah, like all our life we get olive oil from Palestine, that kind of thing. And since then, I've kind of been like, okay, so I guess all Palestinians receive olive oil from Palestine, and it's something that's totally normal, right? It's totally you get a tenaket, I get a tenaket. It's totally normal. But we don't actually sit there and think about this olive oil is coming from a land that most Palestinians can't access.
Sure.
This olive oil comes from trees that some of them are thousands of years old. This olive oil, like, think of the journey that single olive went through the tree, how it grew. Like, just think of it. It's so beautiful and poetic, right? And then from then, obviously, there's always been that kind of thought in my head. And as I had children, I started thinking to myself, like, I want my children to obviously have a strong identity and understand that. And around the time when my daughter was 6 years old, and she started questioning, where are we from? You know, like at school, the teacher puts my picture next to the Canadian flag. And in the summer, we go to Jordan. But on International Day, you tell me to wear Palestinian tobe, you know?
Yeah.
She's like, so where are we from?
She's confused. Yeah.
So obviously I have to be like, we're from Palestine. It's a beautiful place. Everybody wants it. People are fighting over it. We can't be there now, but inshallah soon we'll be back there. So I have to have like this PG conversation. She's like, do we have anything from Palestine? Do we, like, in this house? And I'm like, yeah, we do.
Okay.
We have Palestinian olive oil. It comes from Palestine. It's beautiful and it's special, and it's unlike anything else you've ever really had in the olive oil world. And she wanted to gift her teacher something Palestinian so she could have that conversation with her teacher. So I was like, you know what? Let's give her a bottle of olive oil. But I'm not going to make the same mistake my mom used to make, which is like put it like in a plastic bottle and I'll give you a friend. خلاص عادي.
Wrapped in tissue.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, no. This is beautiful. This is rare. This is like, so unique. Let me put it in a beautiful bottle and let me print a sticker to explain to her and let me and that. And it kind of evolved into like a little gift that we gave her teacher. And she was very proud to gift it to her teacher. And that was around 4 years ago that happened. And then it became like, okay, you know what? I have it ready. Let me gift a few friends, and then from a few friends, and so on and so forth. And over the last 4 years, it's kind of been like this bonding experience between me and my daughter, where we go to markets together. She comes with me. She explains to people about Palestinian olive oil. And we've developed like a product which is kind of like an educational gift box that as a Palestinian, you would give to somebody who's not Palestinian, to tell them or to explain to them that, you know what, in Palestine, we create beautiful things. Like, Palestine is a lot of sad and horrible and bad things, but at the same time, people in Palestine have a beautiful spirit and they create amazing things. And this is just one thing that we're making, and we're so proud of it. It's beautiful produce, right? So I see it now. Like, I see it in my daughter when she goes to like a market and she's chatting with somebody. I'm like, She's a little Palestinian.
It must be listening to your story, especially, you know, with your daughter. I feel like once you, correct me if I'm wrong, once you had a daughter, you might have had a strong Palestinian identity, but having a daughter almost forces you to double down to make sure that they feel about it the same way you do. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, definitely. And I feel like there's a lot of conversations that need to be had about being Palestinian and what it means to be Palestinian. You know what I mean? Like if you're wearing something Palestinian, if you're wearing, like if my daughter is wearing like something like this, or if my husband is wearing like a t-shirt that says Palestine on it, I'm always like, you're wearing that. You're representing every Palestinian. You know, you behave in a certain way when you're wearing that. You are representing the entire community when you're wearing that. So there's like a responsibility that comes with being Palestinian, right?
Yeah.
And you know, it's I genuinely feel like it's my job to be a exemplary
example. Is that the word?
To be an example
Sure.
as a Palestinian, right?
Yeah.
And obviously to my children as well, right? But the olive oil has just kind of been like a means to explore, you know, Palestinian identity and to keep kind of looking at it from different angles.
Yeah.
So,
So Zeit Bladi is the Zeit Bladi.
Oh, man, that Bladi
I know.
business, man.
I got, you know, and I read it, and even like reading it on Instagram, I'm like, is it Bladi or Bladi? No, but the L's before, so it must be Bladi. But like, it just sounds, Bladi just sounds like, you know, a vibe too. So that's why it's a bit confusing.
100%. And I get so many, and I'm just like, okay, I'm gonna have to do something with that Bladi. Maybe I'm just gonna drop it at some point, you know. But yeah, and honestly, the name just came out of like, okay, what should I write for the teacher?
Sure,
right?
sure.
So
Yeah.
we wrote Zeit Bladi, and then I made the Instagram page. I was like, you know what? I'll link it to a page, so in case the teacher wants to know more, like
Sure.
maybe I'll put some educational content on there. Like,
Yeah.
this is me like thinking like that one teacher she don't know, like psycho mom mode, you know.
So I've looked at the content on Instagram, and it's so you, because there's a comedic aspect to it. It's funny, it's light, it's relatable, and I love that there's an educational piece to it, not just this is a beautiful Palestinian product, but let me tell you a little bit more about how the history of this and why this is important. So through my research, I didn't know that 25% of the land in the West Bank and Gaza is just dedicated for olive oil.
Yeah.
That's a mass. Like, I knew it's big, but I didn't know it was that big. And I know Zeit Bladi, you work with farmers in the West Bank. Is that correct? Okay. So could you tell me how did it come from just that gift that one day to building this relationship with the farmers and now having something that you're actively like working on and building?
Okay, well, I mean, it's something that developed really organically, like most amazing things in life, right? We get our olive oil from a farm that we know the owner of the farm in the West Bank.
Okay.
So it's somebody that my dad has a relationship with. It's close friends with my dad, and from there, the relationship developed. So we continue to source the olive oil from that farm. So it's a small family-run farm. They send us the olive oil. We bottle it. We package it. We sell it. And because it's a grassroots initiative, we're sending the profits back to the Palestinian farming community, just to support the farmers to stay connected to the land. Yeah, and olive oil is a huge industry for most like over 100,000 Palestinian families in the West Bank depend on the olive harvest.
Wow, it's that many.
Yeah, they depend on it for their livelihood for the
Wow.
entire year.
Wow.
So it's a huge industry. So if you're going to be supporting Palestinians, supporting them through the olive oil is really a great thing to do. And when you think of the olive oil itself and the olive tree, I'm sure you've seen through your research, there's just so many like poetic and strong relationships that are tied between the Palestinian farmer and the tree.
Yeah.
And one of the most interesting things that I came across was that the olive tree, when a farmer plants it, it takes up to 20 years for you to see the fruit of that tree.
Wow, 20 years.
Up to 20 years, which is the Nibali olive, okay?
Okay.
So the olive that we're drinking today, it wasn't that farmer who planted that olive tree. It was like a generation before or a generation before.
I had no idea. That's insane.
It's insanity. So when we're supporting farmers today to plant trees, they're not planting them for themselves. They're planting them for a future generation. So there's this like continuity that exists with farming. There's this generational aspect. There's a tradition that's being passed down where one farmer farms for their grandchildren and their great grandchildren.
That's
So
beautiful.
there's
Wow.
such beauty that exists in it.
Wow.
And with Zeit Bladi, because obviously we're trying to educate people about
Sure,
this,
sure.
right? So every year before the harvest arrives, we design a gift box, and we try to make the gift box relevant to how Palestinians are feeling that year or what they're experiencing that year. So the entire initiative is like 6 months. It's not something I do all year round.
Sure.
The olive oil arrives. We package it, we sell it at like different markets and pop-ups and like interact with people. And then once the olive oil finishes, we lock up and
Yeah.
we wait for the next year. So before it comes, I have to like sit there and reflect, like as a Palestinian, how are we feeling this year? Like what are we going through? What are we experiencing, right? And I try to be like true to that.
Okay.
So for example, at the beginning of this year, I was feeling like maybe it's feeling a little hopeful. Maybe. But then obviously it wasn't hopeful anymore. So then we had to like scratch that and go back to like a black design. Last year, the design spoke a lot about educating people about that type of olive and about the tree and about that experience. This year, the story is more like the tree is telling the story. What's the tree going to tell you about the farmer? What's
Okay.
the tree experiencing? And how everything that the tree experiences is like pure truth. So everything that comes out of that tree is truth. So when you are drinking it, you are really drinking pure truth, the pure like truth of the existence of a Palestinian. You know? I could talk about it forever. Really.
Keep going.
And the farm that we deal with is run by an amazing person who really speaks about olive trees and olive farming in a very poetic way, which obviously speaks to me, you know? So for example, all of the trees that are planted on one row, they need to be harvested. Their olives need to be harvested together because those trees, they drank the same soil. They have the same energy. So there's the idea of like treating a tree with such respect, right? A tree belongs to a family. A tree drinks with other trees. A tree shares nutrients versus just like, 20 farms, mass production.
Yeah, pull it up and let's go.
Yeah. Like they say, if you want to have beautiful olive oil, you need to find olive oil that comes from a single source. And you need to check that your olive oil is from a single olive. And you need to check that it's all being processed in the same location. Because, nowadays what they do is major companies.
Pick it, go ship it, they'll deal with it, they'll produce it.
Exactly. It's being moved around. Like, for example, a lot of beautiful olives are harvested in Tunisia, which has some of the most beautiful olive oil in the world. But what they do is they pick the farmers there pick the olives, and then like big, giant European corporations buy the olives. They squeeze them somewhere in Italy, and they say Italian olive oil, that kind of thing.
On this, I'm so happy first of all, there's so many things that you talked about that I didn't know. I didn't know that it takes 20 years for an olive tree to bear fruit. I didn't know that it all has to come from a single source. I didn't know it. Hearing that, I don't know why the 20-year thing that I'm not planting this for like Khaled, I'm planting this for like my kids and then their kids. Because when I was doing my research, I know it's a very generational thing, but now I understand why. I understand why there's a deeper meaning, behind it. You touched on the olive oil production side, and I think it'd be useful for people if you could walk us through what does that process look like. So because you harvest it every 6 months, you said? Like
once a year.
Once a year. So walk us through from now we have just finished the harvest. We're getting ready for the next year. What is that process kind of look like? Because I think it'd be interesting.
Just finished the harvest?
Yeah, so like to go from, we are now planning for 2025's harvest.
Okay. Well, what's amazing about olive trees, and especially in Palestine, because they belong in Palestine, right? We said that.
Yeah.
They don't need as much upkeep as long as the season is well and it rains regularly. Olive trees don't need as much upkeep, and that's why they're so resilient, and they have that longevity with them, right?
Yeah.
So most farmers, what they do is they check on the soil. There's like technical terms, but they check on the soil twice a year. So they go back to their farm and they make sure that there are no weeds within the soil because weeds would be taking, some of the nutrients. And they check on it twice a year throughout that year. And obviously, if it's a low rain kind of year, then they need to water the trees a little bit more. When it's the time for the harvest, there's almost like a science that exists. I guess it's like a cultural science that's passed down. Yeah, it's one of those, like I've heard the farmers speaking of like, they'll go and they'll check on the olives and they'll say like, one more rain. After one rain they'll be ready. Because obviously there's beauty in it as well. The reason that Palestinian olive oil is so beautiful as well is because, obviously due to certain restrictions, the industry is not allowed to develop. It hasn't mechanically, become super advanced like Italian or other European olive oil industries. But in that sense, also there's a beauty because it's still maintained like the traditional aspect of it, right? The entire community almost, takes time off to go to the olive grove to help with the picking of the olives. And then they're moved over to the pressers, and then there's almost like a queue of like, no, it's Abu Abdullah's farm. And then, because there's a communal presser that's being pressed with these like traditional mechanical ways. And then once it's pressed, it's automatically, placed in the large tenaques, the 16-liter tins that we receive here in the UAE. Wait, I had something to say about that. I forgot now. But yeah, it's just like a beautiful process really that exists. Yeah. It's the whole community, right?
And that was the community aspect is something that I didn't know about until I started doing my research.
What do you know about olive oil, Khalid? Come on.
I don't know much, to be honest. I know it tastes good, but I don't know that much.
Oh, wow.
But what was surprising to me is the community aspect was interesting to me because I knew, it's a deep rooted in Palestinian culture and so on, but I never considered the community aspect that everyone comes to. This is like an event.
Yeah.
It's not just like, this guy has his farm and like he takes care of it. It's like everyone's coming together to make this product happen. So many different hands. Yeah. So many different families.
And that's like something that you see like on bottles, for example, like hand-picked olives, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But for us, that's just the way that it is. We got no other way, It's like the entire extended family will come to the farm and everybody will pick and everybody will support because everybody also wants their share of the olive oil as well, right? True. And then whatever surplus that family has, then they sell, Yeah. And sometimes obviously for export as well. And there's even when it comes to the olive itself, there's even like a little science about when the olive itself is being squeezed. So you've seen green olives and then you've seen purple olives. Mm-hmm. Now this is the same olive. It's just how ripe it is.
Oh, okay. That's just been gone on for longer. Okay.
Exactly. Okay. So when the olive is greener and it's squeezed, it will produce a little less oil, but it'll be higher quality oil. But when it's left to ripen, it'll produce more oil, but it'll be like a different grade of oil. So every farmer and how they deal with it and that kind of thing.
And is that just a personal preference from farm to farm, how you want to do it?
I mean, if they're doing it for like, business purposes, corporations, let it.
Yeah, go. It's fine.
And then when they're pressing, there's the idea of is heat being used or not? If heat is being used, you're going to get a lot of oil. Right? But if heat isn't being used, you're going to get cold pressed, beautiful, extra virgin olive oil.
And is that like the top of the top? Like
that's the top. It's got to be cold pressed. Because olive is a fruit.
Yes.
Right? So realistically, olives shouldn't be like in the canned section of the supermarket. They should be next to the oranges and the apples, right? And when you take an orange and you squeeze it and you drink the juice of the orange, you need to keep it cool, right? If you boil the orange juice before you drink it, you're killing all the nutrients in it. Yeah. And olives are the exact same thing. You take the olive, you juice it. The olive oil is the juice. So a lot of times in markets, I'll be telling people, by the way, this isn't even olive oil. This is olive juice right here. Okay. Keep it cool. Take care of it. Keep it in a dark place. And you know what? Consume it within 6 to 8 months. Keep it fresh.
Oh, so that was, I was going to ask you, that's the time frame for for it to be, to enjoy at the highest quality you probably can.
I mean, like...
It doesn't go bad. Does it go bad? I really don't know.
It doesn't go bad. Olive oil doesn't go bad, but it can go stale. you know?
Yeah, you taste it.
Yeah. There's
Yeah.
staleness. Like for the olive oil to really have like fruity notes, to have like that peppery kind of little bit of burn at the end of it, that's something that needs to be consumed quick, you know? So that's why, you know, it's best to always, if you're gonna buy from the shop, which I advise against, never buy large quantities, because once it's open and exposed to oxygen, then it's just like, okay, I'd give it like 6 months to a year, and then khalas, you should get rid of it, you know?
Okay.
But I mean, for Palestinians and other Mediterranean people, it's like, chug it.
That's it. Fuck it.
Exactly. And honestly, like for us with Zeit Bladi, because, you know, like it's a gift box, and in it, there's a bottle that's 350 ml. Okay. And I get so many different types of people that approach at markets to have a discussion, because obviously you're, you know, interacting with the community. I'll have people that come up and they automatically, like, it clicks for them, like, oh, I'm a Palestinian, I want to give this to my boss that knows nothing about Palestine, I want to show him what we have. And then you have like the ammo that comes like, شو هاي صحن لبنة مين بيشتري هاي, you know? And I get like a بهدلة, بتقنعيهم عن جد بيشتروها? And I have to be like, yes, Ammo. I swear, I had an Ammo that came up to me one time, and he was like, Pishtaruha? I'm like, as in, like, he's on my side, you know? And it's a scam, you know? Like, I'm doing a scam. I'm like, Ammo, like, think of the packaging. And he'll be like, Pishtaruha, الأجانب? And then I'm like, yeah, Pishtaruha. He's like, Guli wallah. I'm literally standing like, Wallah Ammo, Pishtaruha. Like bringing me, really humbling you. You know what I mean? But olive oil does that. Like all Palestinians feel a sense of ownership over olive oil. Like you can't imagine how much time I spend interacting with people discussing how their olive oil is better.
Yeah,
I'm
sure. And I'm so happy you said that, because that was the next question I was just about to jump onto, because olive oil, lots of Arab countries around the world produce olive oil. Every country, even in Europe, they produce, in like Spain and whatever. Every country has a special connection to olive oil.
Yeah.
That's known. It means something to them is different. However, and I'm going to be biased here, because also fact.
Go for it.
Ours is the best, like fact, number one. And number two, and I can't wait for the comments on this, but number two is, although each place has a different connection to it, I feel for Palestine and Palestinian olive oil, it's different.
Dude.
You know what I mean?
Tell me about it.
Because it's ingrained into economically, politically, historically, religiously, culturally. Like it's in the bones, it's in the blood, you know? So I feel it's different for us. Our connection to it is different than other countries might be to theirs.
Mm-hmm. I agree 1000%. Yeah. I mean, just like a religious aspect, like I have like a lot of South African clients, and they take
South African.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they purchase the olive oil in large quantities, and they take it to South Africa, like in the gift box. And they say people cry when we give it to them. Like, this comes from the Holy Land, you know. This is, you know, for example, the village is roughly 90 kilometers from Jerusalem. Like, wow, this is so close. It's so close to our belief. It's like Jesus drank the same olive oil. You know, there's a lot of religious context tied into it. And it's important for us as Palestinians to give ourselves credit for how beautiful it is, because I think we kind of just brush it under the rug. We take it for granted, like we said. Like for me, for example, every time I travel to a country, I take a box with me, and I play like a little game of like olive oil roulette.
Okay.
Like, who will get the bottle this time? And I just carry it with me wherever I go. And I go, I'm sure I'll meet somebody. And it's the universe. You know, when you're asking for it, you're going to get it. Like a few months ago, I was in Barcelona, and I took a bottle with me. It was actually the first bottle of the season.
Wow. Oh, okay.
And I took it with me, and I went to there was like a small Palestinian gathering, and I met a lady in the line, and she was like 70 plus years old. And she was like, oh, I'm talking to her, like, how do you hear about this? And she's like, oh, ever since I was in university, I heard about Palestine, and I've made it like my life's mission. All of my free time on the weekends after work, I keep dedicating to Palestine. And I'm like, oh, she's the one, you know? So then I was like, I have something for you. I want to give you something from Palestine, like to say thank you. And she's like, oh, what is it? So then I take out the box and like I'm giving it to her. And she was like, what is this? And she opens it and she looks at it and she's like, oh, from Palestine? Like from Palestine? And she can't, like she's at a loss for words. And she's like, what is it? Like, what do I do with it? You're Spanish, you know olive oil. Like, I don't know. Chug it, you know, whatever. And she's like, no, this is so special. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. Oh my gosh, like from Palestine. She starts like crying. Like she's so emotional that this is actually was on the land of Palestinians, you know? Mm-mm. And honestly, she was so moved by it. I was like, yeah, it is amazing. Khalas, give it back. I don't want to give it to you anymore. She starts like hugging me and she's like, can I give it to someone? Can I, like, she's overwhelmed. Like she doesn't know what to do with it. I'm like, oh my gosh, if only she knows that ammo, that same ammo. I was like, صحن لبنة, you know? So it's, you know, it's special. It really is like, just now having this conversation, like I want to go home and like chug some olive oil.
Yeah,
real quick,
I can't wait to
know?
open this up, man. I'm so excited. First of all, I really appreciate and respect the fact that you take it with you when you travel, because I believe there's a couple of ways you can learn about a culture. The two biggest ones are music and food. Mm-hmm. Now, music can be a hit or miss, but food is the one that if you just give anyone, yo, try this. If they like it, the first question, what is this? Where is it from? You have a direct link to that culture, to that place. So the fact that you take it around with you, you are giving more people in the world an opportunity or a chance to connect with Palestine, to taste what this is. And then that might be the start. That is what fuels curiosity to start with. Yeah. Because if you didn't know, now you know. Yeah,
I wish I could hand out shots of it, you know, wherever I go. Honestly, yeah. I mean, it's also like people who have absolutely no reason to be passionate about Palestine, who are, you know, that you know, takes me back as well. It makes me emotional. Like, you know, that lady, like, you know, she's super old and her whole life is dedicated to Palestine, and she's never like had that contact, you know, with Palestine. And this bottle of olive oil means the world to her, you know, and she'll remember it and she'll have it. She probably has it like on display in her house, you know? Yeah. But yeah, it's the olive oil is something that anybody and everyone would appreciate. No matter who you give it to, it's not going to go to waste, you know?
For sure.
Good quality. And like nowadays, olive oil is like super, like the benefits of olive oil, it's super trending. And now they're even saying you should be consuming up to 1 liter a week, you know? Olive oil should be...
1 liter?
1 liter.
What?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. They say like olive oil should be like the number one thing you consume. There's like all of these studies that are coming out now that say like at the most basic level, your cell, an olive oil regenerates the cell. So it makes the membrane better, makes the DNA better, makes everything in your cell better. So with that, there's like,
as if I need a reason to like not put more oil. I'm in. I'm sold.
So like every single function in your body is optimized and made better with olive oil, you know?
Wow.
So like chug it, you know, put it on, lather it on, whatever you want to do with it. Yeah. It's great in every way.
And we've touched on the Palestinian, the farmers, because I don't think we've talked about the farmer enough just yet. Because what I want to understand, like, I know this is, and every culture has this, you have generational like wisdom, you know, generational traditions. This is how it's been done for thousands and thousands of years. So I'm curious, through your journey and speaking to the Palestinian farmers, is there anything that you've learned from them that you probably weren't aware of before?
I mean, a lot of the things that I've shared already are things that I've learned.
Okay.
But I remember the most shocking thing that I learned, which is more like on the economic side of it.
Yeah, I didn't know it was it was that big of a contributor to, you know, to like the country's like exports, the number one agricultural export, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah. But I learned, because I a few months ago, I had a meeting with the Palestinian Agricultural Development Society.
Okay.
And we're having a chat about, you know, the olive oil and the harvest and how I'm trying to support the farmers, blah, blah, blah. And then he was like, but you know, the teneke that arrives to you in the UAE, it's for export. And people are selling them here. You know, it's a business. It's a big trade, the tenekes. And I would say like the 16-liter tin probably goes for, 600 to 800 dirhams, right? And he was like, do you know that the Palestinian farmer, the one who owns the farm that made that oil, he doesn't see 10% of that, which like broke my heart. I was like, there's so much that goes into obviously the middlemen, but that farmer that really embodies everything that we want as Palestinians, the person that's out there, you know, fighting their trees from being uprooted, fighting to harvest, you know, despite checkpoints, the person that's harvesting, that's bringing their family, that's staying connected to the land, that really is the embodiment of the Palestinian, you know, person, is getting such little support from us, you know, and we think we're supporting them. We think like when we're buying the tenekes and we're sharing it, we think like we're staying connected through that, but in reality, they're receiving so little.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you said that, because as I mentioned, the podcast I had the other day about coffee, is the story for the coffee farmer is exactly the same.
Yeah,
it has blown my mind, or like breaks my heart, that because without them, we don't have anything. There's no coffee, there's no olive oil, there's no nothing, and it's generational. It's your family's livelihood. It's crazy how they get the short end of the stick when they're the ones that should have all the power. Somehow they don't, which I don't understand.
And with the Palestinian farmer, there's that extra layer. I don't want to say layer. I want to say 20 layers.
Yeah, exactly.
Of like, you know, fighting to exist, fighting to have an identity. So on top of that, they're doing, you know, our work really, you know, to stay connected to that land. Yeah. Because wouldn't that be ideal if the farmers stopped farming and nobody was connected to the land anymore and there was no reason for them to stay? That would be ideal for a lot of people, right? Mm-hmm. And we need to encourage that farmer to stay and know we love your olive oil and we want to support your olive oil and keep doing it because you're out there really struggling for us, you know?
100%.
And the farmers have also, like, there is a beauty that exists in, like, the original Palestinian is the fallah farmer Palestinian, right? Like I see it a lot in my mom's family. Like when the olive harvest comes in, there is this tradition of like all of my uncles, each person brings the oil from their little patch and they meet up together and they almost like have a competition of whose oil is better. And they start like trading, like, I'll take a little bit of yours. No, mine's better. I'm like, 2 of yours equals 1 of mine. Like there's this competitiveness, right? Like we have to preserve that. Like I want my children to know what the olive harvest means. Like I want them, inshallah, to be in Palestine and we go down to the farm and we help harvest the trees. Like, it's something that I didn't get to experience, but like, you know what? I want my children to be better than me and I want my children to experience more than me. So why not push for that, you know?
100%. And you touched on the middlemen, and what I love about what you do and what I think people who want to support any Palestinian thing is to get in touch or connect to the source. Yeah. Because that's how I believe you're going to be able to contribute the most to them. So it doesn't have to pass so many hands and all the profits or whatever goes directly to them.
100%.
So I wanted to, first of all, say thank you so much for what you do.
Stop.
I really, really appreciate it. And I appreciate people who do stuff to help Palestinians, to support Palestinians. I have to be honest, it's an area of my life that I've struggled with a lot, to be very honest. Over time, I feel like I am getting more connected. On a personal level, I always have felt proud, whatever, but there's always been a disconnect internally. So I appreciate people who do these things because it motivates me to want to do these. That's why when you reached out and you're like, I want to come on the podcast and this is when I talk what I want to talk about, I'm like, finally, there's this one thing I would, and it's what I do, I would love to.
Yeah, like I'm all in.
You know, I'm all in.
And you know what? When it comes to like being a Palestinian and speaking up as a Palestinian, like I was saying on the way here, I was thinking to myself, like, Palestinians are really good at critiquing other Palestinians. You know, there's a lot of like, well, no, you shouldn't say that, or no, as a Palestinian, that's not the right thing to say. So there's that element of like, oh, am I saying the right thing? Am I representing it in the right way? But honestly, most recently through the olive oil, I don't know if you've noticed, but to anybody who opens my social media and they go down a little bit, you would see that my content was very serious, very serious, very serious. And then most recently has become more playful.
More lighthearted. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was something that I took as a decision for myself. I found myself restricting how I am or how I appear as a Palestinian through social media, just because like, oh, being Palestinian is really serious. It's a really serious thing. But then I thought to myself, like, is this what I want for my children? I want them to think that being Palestinian is boring or being Palestinian is sad and bad and all of that. No, you can be Palestinian and you can be fun and you can be out there. And we've learned so much of this from people in Palestine that are going through so much and they're still creating beautiful things, right?
Yeah.
So even, for example, last month we were at Seoul DXB. Right? I had so many like Palestinian youth coming up to me and just being like, wow, thank you for making Palestinian olive oil cool. Yeah. Like, thanks for being here, like out of all places. And thanks for representing and like making us something else, you know? So that's why like now I've taken this like very, on purpose decision that I am Palestinian. I'm proud of being Palestinian, but being Palestinian is not one thing. It's a lot of things and it can be anything. Yeah. So screw everyone else.
The point you made about, which is such a great point, about how a Palestinian should act, how a Palestinian should feel, should be, should present, is so true. It's a point that I've always felt, but when you said it, I'm like, I resonated with that a lot because I don't have that. And I think I don't have that because I'm figuring it out myself, with my own time, with my own learning, research, and so on. I look at others and sometimes I'm like, I wish I felt to that level. I don't feel that yet, but I wish maybe I will someday.
There's no wrong. There's no wrong though.
Exactly. But I also like to be honest with myself and honest with the audience about how I feel about these things. It's going to be very easy for me to come and sit like, I'm Mr. Palestine, but I'll be, that wouldn't be right and it wouldn't be true. And I'm still trying to figure it out. And stuff like these kind of conversations, learning, is what is slowly, over time, pushing me more and more down to that, to feel a closer connection with my Palestinian roots.
Once you drink that liquid gold,
it's gonna be.
You're gonna like they're gonna be doing debka in the living room. Like before the olive oil, Khalid's all like, after the olive oil, you'll be like,
That's a great skit to do. That's such a good piece of content. So just to round off our conversation, I have two last questions for you. These are questions I ask all my guests.
Cool.
So looking back either personally or professionally, when I ask you the question, what are you most proud of for yourself? What would you say?
Ooh, I'll tell you what I'm most proud of. It's something so special that in 2003, as a stand-up comedian, I was invited to tour in Palestine as part of the Palestinian Comedy Festival.
Wow, that's amazing. Yes. Oh, I had no idea. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I got to go to, get the list ready, Ramallah, 3 shows. Nablus, Beit Lahem, and Jerusalem. Like Jerusalem, like the heart of Jerusalem, with an audience and people listening to me. And I obviously like a life-changing experience, an experience where I had to like reflect to myself, like, I'm fake Palestinian and these people are real Palestinians. And like, what if I'm not Palestinian enough? They're going to be like, that vibe. But I went in as a person and I left that experience as a completely different person, and it has changed me. So from the summer of 2003 till now, that is That's like the most epic shit ever.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
What an experience that must have been. And as a
Yeah.
Palestinian, and to go there, and like you said, you went one way. I'm sure you left a completely different
Oof,
way. You know, that
And I
probably
was-
catapulted to what got us to here right now.
Yeah, 100%. It really like kind of like pushed me in that
Sure,
direction.
yeah.
And I was with like super legends. Like I was with Amir Zahir and Maya Hussein and Ahmed and like just like a few comedic legends that was just like, and it was the first time in my life when I was introduced on a stage. Like when Amir would introduce me, he would be like, and this is Isra Abu Zayed from Bi'r al-Sib'a. Like he just said the city.
Like
Like-
spot on.
Like he just said the city. Like usually
Yeah.
in my life, my introduction is like, I'm Palestinian, I grew up in Canada, I live in Dubai. I was like, that's it? I'm
Yeah,
just
yeah.
a city? Like
Yeah,
this
yeah.
is so unique for me.
Yeah.
So that's a
Wow.
little something.
What an experience that must have been. That's
Unreal.
That's such a great story.
That's a whole other show, you know?
Yeah, oh, we will. That's round 2. And for my last question, Isra, what is the message you'd like everyone to take home with them today?
I mean, do I have to look at the camera to give
No.
them a message?
No, you don't.
Okay. Well, obviously, because I'm here for olive oil. So my message would be for people, when it comes to buying whatever it is that you're buying, please choose where your money goes. You know, buy from sources that you know are making the right impact. Support people that you want to support. Be a lot more conscious when you're spending. So, for example, with, I don't know, Ramadan around the corner, wherever this episode comes out, you know, give gifts that are, you know, of a conscience, gifts that give back to the community, wherever it may be. And if it's going to be olive oil, make sure that it's olive oil that's coming from a community that you support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I love what you said there about picking where choosing, being conscious about where your money goes.
Yeah.
I think nowadays we're all trying to be more conscious consumers.
100%.
Obviously, as Palestinians, it comes from many different reasons. But guys, just to check it out, this is my box. Sorry. All right. Check it out here. Wow, dude, it's beautiful. It's so nice. Just gonna leave that there.
Thanks. Oh, it's in there. It's nestled. It's nestled. Oh.
This is it, guys. Zeit from Zeit
Bladi.
Bladi. Yeah, I got it right. Check it out. We'll put the links, it's everything in the description, in the show notes. Isra, thank you so much, man. I've always wanted to have you on the podcast anyway. And when you reached out, I'm like, first of all, I wanted to have her, so great. Number 2, the reason you reached out, I'm like, even better. So thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for the amazing work that you're doing to support Palestinians and get the word out there. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure many, many others do. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
If anyone wants to get in touch, get the olive oil, where do we go?
Through the Instagram. So
Instagram?
at Zeit Bladi.
Bladi.
Not Baladi. Screw those Baladi guys. There's another account called
really?
Zeit Bladi. And I'm like, oh my God, are a lot of people just going there and being like, hey, Isra. Zeit Bladi.
Zeit Bladi. We'll put it in the show notes correctly to make sure. So, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
you.
Guys, to everyone listening, please make sure to like, follow, share, and subscribe to the podcast. I hope it helps pod on all channels. And as always, guys, hope it helps. Peace.
Woo!
Awesome. And that's another episode in the bag, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. All I'm trying to do is give back with this podcast. So if you walked away from this episode having learned something new, gained a new perspective, or you simply just enjoyed the episode, that means I've done my job. If you could please do me the small favor of hitting that subscribe button, it would really mean the world to me and would help me build the show and build the channel. And that's all I ask. Stay tuned for a lot more conversations, new topics, more exciting guests. But until then, and until next time, guys, hope it helps. Peace.